So that I will open the meeting, regular meeting of council of Tuesday, September 4th. There are no public questions. Approval of the agenda. There was one, the agenda notes under new business G4, development permit application for 120 Kananaskis Way, but in the body of the report that, or the body of the agenda, it has D4. So we'll just make a note of that. Are there any other changes? Councillor Comfort?
Yeah, there's just a date. I'm just madly trying to find it. It should be October 2nd, 2017, and it's October 2nd, 2018. So we'll find it and I will advise the clerk.
Okay. In the agenda? I mean the minutes?
It's in the, no, it's in the agenda.
Agenda, okay. Well, with that, I'll move the agenda be approved as with the slight change noted. Those in favor? Opposed? There are no delegations. Looking to the minutes of the August 21st regular meeting of council, are there errors or omissions? Seeing none, I'll move they be adopted as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Moving on then to item F1, the Records Retention Instruction Bylaw 2018-14. Ms. Hyde.
Thank you.
This reminds me of the Muppet Show. There are three at the back there, except it's supposed to be only two, and you're supposed to be cranky.
What is it,
I don't know. Used to.
Didn't we used to have younger? It was used to be younger as
Right.
It used to be the Muppet Show back.
Okay.
Way back. I feel like I should break into song now, but I won't. So, my first item on the agenda here is to ask council to rescind the records retention bylaw we asked you to pass in 2016, and in which we asked council to authorize the 35-page retention schedule that's attached, and instead replace it with a new bylaw that would delegate the authority for the retention schedule to the CAO. So I just wanted to remind you what the records retention schedule is for. So this long schedule, it's attached to your council report, that's in addition to the bylaw, identifies all the records that are produced by the town regardless of format. So our main formats are paper or digital. And it sets out a minimum requirement for how long we keep every kind of record that we produce. So some of the retention periods are based on legislative requirements, in which you'll see a citation down the far right side under defining authorities. And where there is no legislation, or where we'd like to keep it longer than the legislation sets out, we also identify retention by our business needs, how long we need to keep things as a municipality. After we meet the retention periods set out in this schedule, we may destroy records. So what typically happens when someone's met its retention period is we pull those records and ask the department that owns those records to review them to make sure they're good to go. Mostly we've been applying retention to paper records up until now because that's where our technology is at. But if you've been following along with our EDRMS project, the purpose of the EDRMS project is to allow us to apply retention also to our electronic documents. So we're not quite there yet, but we're in progress of doing that. So the reason municipalities might want to destroy records after a certain amount of time, when it very first started out, it was a lot to do with space requirements. People have records rooms in their, or organizations have records rooms in their municipalities. They rent storage. They've got, places like Iron Mountain commercial storage, and it just grows and grows and grows and grows and grows, and there gets less and less of a need to keep certain kinds of records. So that's where retention was kind of born, and destruction. The other thing that happens when you collect a lot of records over time is it makes it really hard to find the records that you need, because you're always searching through mountains of stuff that you might not even need to keep for any kind of business reason, to find the things that you do need to keep for business reasons. And then the last reason is to protect third party and add another level of protection, I should say, to personal and third party information. So we already do protect our personal information, such as our employment records, third party information like tender documents. But a risk is if you start keeping things longer than you need to for legal or business reasons, you've just added a little level of risk because you're keeping things now longer than you need to, and you need to keep still protecting them. So that's the reason to have a retention schedule. What the MGA says, the reason that it's a bylaw, is the MGA says, especially Part 2 here, is that if you're going to destroy records, you need a bylaw from council that authorizes that destruction. So what we've done in the past is said council approves the attached retention schedule, and then after that we're authorized to destroy them through our administrative processes. What we're finding, especially now that we're moving into the EDRMS project, is that a lot of the descriptions are needing to be tightened up, maybe a few things added to them. It's mostly that middle column there with the definitions. What's it called? Description. And how it stands right now is we'll have to come back to council every single time we want to do an amendment to that description and ask for 3 readings of an amending bylaw. So it feels like that is not really the best use of time, and probably not the intention of the MGA either, I'm guessing. But luckily the MGA has a section that allows council to, I think it's this one right here, delegate duties through a bylaw. I'm sorry. There we go. Whew. Right, so Section 203 of the MGA allows council to delegate duties such as authorizing the destruction of records to, in this case, the Chief Administrative Officer. So that's what we're asking for you today, to do today in the bylaw amendment. And I know there'll be, just because this bylaw is in front of you, there might be a lot of questions about the retention periods and things like that themselves, so you're welcome to ask those questions as well. And I just wanted to point out Section 214.1 is specifically to do with council minutes, which we don't record them on microfiche, so that's set out in the bylaw. We won't be destroying those anytime soon. And then a new section under 214.3 that requires us to keep someone's personal information if it was used to make a decision about them for a minimum period of 1 year. And I'll just maybe forestall your question, Councillor Sanford, maybe. A lot of personal information has different legislation attached to it, so things like personnel records, that's the big one for us with personal information, complaint files, things like that. Most of that stuff is set out for longer periods of time in legislation, but for things that don't have any other requirement, we have to keep things for a minimum of 1 year. So a great example is job application. So if people apply for a posted position and they're not selected for an interview, we still have to keep that application for a minimum of 1 year because we've used it to make a decision about that person. So that's what that's meant to cover. So that ties in with FOIP, that Section 3. So we've just added it to the bylaw straight out of the MGA because it asks you to add those sections to the bylaw. So that's it for my presentation. Recommendation is that you give 3 readings to the bylaw, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks very much. I recall, it seems like yesterday, going through this Schedule A or whatever it was, Attachment 2, no, Schedule A.
Schedule A.
So, but there are no changes at all to Schedule A in this
None.
bylaw. So it's just the authority to do the various bits and pieces.
Yeah.
Are there any questions from members of council? Councillor McCallum?
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Hyde. So I'm just arguing with my mic here. So I think I'm missing something in this, and please forgive me. So this new bylaw is asking for us to defer or to authorize the CAO to dictate when records are destroyed. Mm-hmm. Are we talking about like physical records, or are we talking about digital records?
Both.
Both, okay. And so when we go through the Schedule A, quite a few, in some, actually not in quite a few, in some cases, the defining authorities are none. So, you know, in some cases it says the MGA or Occupational Health and Safety or whatever requires or dictates how long you keep a record. In the case of a defining authority where it says none, we're just sort of putting best practices in play in terms of how they're...
We interviewed all our administration people to find out how long they need to keep them for administrative reasons. The general rule of thumb is for things that aren't just transitory in nature is either 3 years. That usually covers that personal information piece if nothing else applies. 3 years, 7 years is broadly applicable to anything to do with finance. 12 years is broadly applicable to statutory limitations.
Yeah, I figured that, yeah.
And then there's the permanent status. And that's things, like there's nothing that says we have to keep our council agenda packages permanently, for example, in legislation. But administratively and for archive reasons, it's a staff decision to keep those things permanently. And it's also widely practiced throughout other municipalities. So there's no legislation that tells us we have to keep those agenda packages, but we've applied a permanent retention.
Right.
Yeah.
So we understand, what is it, 12 years? Or no, permanent retention.
Yeah.
So how will we know when that changes? When the CAO of the day decides, yeah, I think we should just hang on to them for 3 years. How will council become aware of that?
I don't have a plan to make you aware of that.
Okay.
Yeah. However, that particular example would be unusual.
Okay, so my concern is that we've approved the Schedule A in the past, and there's no way for us to know, not that I necessarily need to approve the change, but to know that there is a change.
Sure.
And so I'm wondering if that's something, like I you know, when other people ask questions, I can put an amendment forward, but if there's some way to make us aware of any changes that have occurred on an annual basis. So like once a year, it's presented at Committee of the Whole, there were new changes made to the Document Retention Act, or there were changes, we've decided to do that, and then at that point, council could say, oh, well, you've gone from forever to 0,
right,
or to 2 years. I guess, and I don't have an issue, like, we're delegating this to a CAO, not necessarily to Lisa DeSoto.
She'll further delegate it, that's right.
So I guess, am I missing something? I'm seeing faces over there and I'm wondering if I'm missing something.
Didn't think of it. But do you maybe want, if the bylaw passes, do you maybe want to put forward a motion that asks for an annual report?
Yeah, that would, yeah, for sure. I'm happy to do that, yeah.
Okay.
So just to your point, Councillor, I mean, pretty much everything in Schedule A, pretty much everything is fairly administrative in nature, and I would think most of the line items wouldn't be of much interest to council. Obviously, if it was a council document like minutes or agendas, that's different. This strikes me as just administrative in nature and better to put within in the realm of administration. But having a report once a year on as to what's been changed, that's what you're suggesting?
That's what I'm suggesting. I'm not suggesting that it be approved. I see the point of the motion of the process. I just want to make sure if there's any drastic changes that council's maybe not comfortable with. The only way we're going to find out is when it's too late. That document's gone. That potentially could be, I don't know. That's the only thing that I kind of wondered about when I read this over the weekend.
Any other questions in for Ms. Hyde? Councillor Comfort?
I just skimmed through the schedule, I'm sorry, but I wondered what records would we absolutely de rigueur keep permanently?
Permanently are council minutes and agendas, a lot of planning documents, and a lot of planning and development related documents and engineering documents. And the retention on capital projects is really long. It almost goes to permanent. It's life of asset. Right. Plus, I think it's 12 more years. So, yeah. You know, if you've got a fire hydrant, for example, it's a life of that asset plus another 12 years for that kind of information. So a lot of the information is long. The things we tend to destroy are finance records that have met their retention period, assessment records, and things containing personal information.
Okay.
So HR has always been a big one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you.
you're welcome.
Are there any other questions for Ms. Hyde? Seeing none, thanks very much for your report.
Thank you.
This time then, I will move the council give first reading to the Records of Retention and Instruction Bylaw 2018-14. And I'll speak in support. I think it is quite reasonable to make it clear that it's CAO that has that ability to decide on the retention of the various hundreds of documents. So I'll support the motion. If there's no other discussion on the motion, I'll call the question. Those in favor, opposed, motion's carried unanimously. We'll then move the council give second reading of the Records Retention and Destruction Bylaw 2018-14. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor, opposed, motion's carried unanimously. I'll seek leave from council, go to the third reading of the bylaw. Those in favor, opposed, motion's carried unanimously. And I'll move the council give third reading of the Records Retention and Destruction Bylaw 2018-14. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor, opposed, motion's carried unanimously. Councilor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have an amendment that I am furiously...
Well, it's not an amendment now, it's a new motion, but that's okay.
New motion, thank you.
You okay over there, Mr. Elliott? You like a little change in the sun?
I don't know if I really want to look at the job.
Okay, I'll leave the blind up then.
Yeah. Flip down. Thank you.
No, I'm not sure which one it is, but sure.
So please forgive my chicken scratch. That council direct administration, I apologize, to provide a report annually if there's anything that has changed in the Schedule A of the Records Retention and Destruction Bylaw. But that Schedule A doesn't exist now, does it? Right.
Yeah, well, it's still part of the, oh, it's gone. Retention schedule, yeah.
And I don't see this as being anything onerous, just sort of an update to council on an annual basis if any of the, only if there's change. So we see with the Schedule A as it sits right now, and if there's change, that's what I would like to know about on an annual basis.
Yeah. I mean, arguably, to your point, once the change has been made, the records are gone. So if it's reported,
but it would apply to future records, Your Worship, and trying to find the balance between an administrative function, but to continue to have oversight as to how things are destroyed from a records perspective. There are quite a few of the items listed in there that do not have any legislative component that requires them that requires how many years that we need to hang on to them.
Sure. I mean, I don't see huge value in it because once it's been changed, it's been changed. So we would then learn in the annual report that pick one is no longer, these reports are no longer retained and the old ones are gone. So then it's like, oh, okay, well, I mean, if it was asking the CAO to come to council before changing any of the retention schedule, that would make sense from
And
council.
I know, and I'm having a difficult time with it too, because I don't want, it's not necessarily something that I feel I need to approve, but it's something I feel I need to be aware of.
Sure. My point is you'll become aware of something that's in the past and you can't change.
But I can change it from happening going forward, Your Worship.
Sure, but you can't recover the lost
No,
documents.
you're correct, absolutely. Then don't vote for it, Your Worship.
Okay, on Councillor McCallum's amending motion, I won't support it. I think, in a way, it's make work. We would be asking the CAO to bring a report forward annually to say what's already occurred. I think council should have confidence in the CAO that whoever the CAO is will recognize the importance of the records and the retention. So I won't support the motion. Anybody else speaking to Councillor McCallum's motion, which is on the overhead? See no more comments, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's defeated. Moving on then. Where were we? F1, F2. Item F2, designated officers, Bylaw Amendment 2018-15.
Thank you. This request is for some amendments to the designated officers bylaw. I was just going to remind us all what the designated officers bylaw is for. So the MGA sets out that council may by bylaw establish designated officer positions. It then goes on to establish about 38 different scenarios where council may want to have a designated officer. And so we pick all the ones that are applicable to our organization and pass a bylaw making sure those officers have been designated. The changes we're looking for today are in 4 sections: signing agreements and checks, signing land use planning documents, carrying out the duties of the Assessment Review Board clerk, and carrying out the duties of the Subdivision and Development Appeal Board clerk. So it's set out in the council report, but for signing agreements and checks, those officers are already designated as our management team. So we have 2 new positions in that area: the acting general manager of corporate services and the manager of economic development. We just want to make sure they can also sign agreements and other, what do they call them, negotiable instruments. Mm-hmm. And since the bylaw was passed in 2014, when we passed the bylaw back then, there wasn't a supervisor of planning and development, so it seemed like a good time to add that position now to the areas of who can sign land use planning documents. We have our taxation officer has done the required training to be the ARB clerk. So originally we just had the manager of finance services, and now both those people are trained, so we'd like to also designate the taxation officer. And the MGA, the changes to the MGA set out new requirements for a clerk to the Subdivision and Development Appeal Board that are sort of similar to the clerk for the ARB. In that there's some responsibilities assigned to that position now, as well as mandatory training. So it does require the SDAB clerks to also be designated officers. So these are the employees in planning and development that either already have or are planning to get certified at the training. Those are the changes that we're asking for. I think that was it.
Thanks.
The recommendation is that we have 3 readings for the bylaw so we can amend the original bylaw.
And in the report, it talks about the adding the taxation officer as the ARB clerk. And it's noted the taxation officer has completed mandatory training. And I guess it's just assumed within the bylaw that those officers that are given that designation would clearly have to take the training before they would qualify.
The MGA actually says 2 things. You have to meet both requirements. It has to be a person who's completed the training and a person who has been designated as a designated officer by council. So you can't just have one thing and qualify.
Great. Are there any questions from Ms. Hyde? Seeing none, thanks for the report. I'll then move the council give first reading to Designated Officers Bylaw Amendment 2018-15. Anybody speaking to the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Then move. Councillor?
I realized that there were 3 readings to this, correct? Yeah. Yes, and I forgotten that. I had a question follow-up for that, so I'll wait till it's completed. Sorry.
Yeah. I'll move then that council gives second reading to Designated Officers Bylaw Amendment 2018-15. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Seek leave from council. Go to third reading of the bylaw. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. And I'll move the council give third reading to the Designated Officers Bylaw Amendment 2018-15. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Councillor McCallum?
I might have been mistaken, but when Ms. Hyde provided her presentation for F1, she stated that we needed to rescind a current bylaw?
That's within the
bylaw.
bylaw.
It's within it? Okay, because I don't remember us actually doing the rescission, sorry.
Yeah, no, it's just within the bylaw. Bylaw 2016-10 is repealed. Moving on then to item F3. Municipal Development Plan Amendment, Third-Party Environmental Impact Statement. Ms. DeSoto.
Your Worship, thank you. Members of Council, I'm here on behalf of Mr. Fark, who authored the report in front of you, but we're seeking an MDP amendment. So the recommendation is before you that Council give 3 readings to Bylaw 2018-16, Municipal Development Plan Amendment, Third-Party Environmental Impact Statement, and schedule a public hearing for September 25th at 5 p.m. So why has this come about? I will draw Council's attention to MDP Clause 18.2.15. And in that clause, it states that the preparation, scope, content, and review of an EIS shall be in accordance with the EIS policy. But then it goes on to state that whenever an EIS is prepared, the town will contract a qualified professional to conduct an independent third-party review of that EIS. And so that all seems well and good, and I remember very well the conversation that led to that clause. However, what we've discovered and a reason for the amendment, and it's certainly administration's understanding, and we're here to clarify that with council, that the intent of this MDP and of the EIS policy is really for transparency to the community and for protection of the town's interests. And so the MDP does not provide direction for situations where the town is actually the developer. And your report outlines in quite some detail a current waterline project that is underway. That's an example of a situation where the town is the developer. There's a complex scope of the project. It's within environmentally sensitive areas. It crosses the Bow River. There's a wildlife corridor and habitat patch that the pipeline goes through. So clearly an EIS is appropriate and should be completed. But we then have the MDP clause that says if an EIS is prepared, we must do a third-party review of that EIS. And those third-party reviews do not come without cost. Again, it was quite explicit at the time of the MDP discussion that council had set out that those costs would be taxpayer costs. And so we've had a couple of those occur already, and they're in the order of $30,000. And so it's administration's position that that is not a good use of taxpayers' dollars, given that we're the ones already leading the first EIS. So the proposed amendment is to add a clause after that current couple of statements that we just went through in 18.2.15 to say, notwithstanding the above, the requirement for an independent third-party review of an EIS does not apply to any EIS prepared by or on behalf of the town. And that is the end of my presentation, and the recommendation is before you. If you have any questions, I will try to answer.
Any questions from members of council for Ms. DeSoto? Councilor McCallum, I knew if I waited long enough. I'm sorry? Said I knew if I waited long enough, somebody would have a question.
It's always me. Thank you for your presentation, Ms. DeSoto. So currently when an EIS is performed by the town on behalf of the town, does that information come to council, or is it published anywhere? How do we make that transparent? Because with a developer, they bring their EIS forward, then the third-party review is done, and then what happens?
I know that Mr. Fish is in the gallery, so he's the one who can best answer that question. I don't believe it comes to council any longer.
Yeah, it would depend on the nature of what the application, what it related to. So if it was related to a subdivision, it would come to the subdivision authority, which is 5 members of council. If it was a major development, it may go to the Canmore Planning Commission, and so would be public as part of that. For a relatively minor development, then it would just be part of the development that would be reviewed by administration. For major, so really it's usually major issues, and so it would usually go to the Canmore Planning Commission, or often council will have some hand in the process. Now, as related to a capital project initiated by the town, that's the situation we're in now. There would be no formal process whereby council would be presented or receive the EIS or a third-party review as currently required. And
so then it's presented to the admin person, the DO that's dealing with it at the time, and then what would they do with the information that's received with that third-party review? If it recommends changes, then those changes would be recommended or instituted as per the EIS, depending on the project manager?
They would generally be required of the project. I can't think of an example where we would ignore the recommendation of a consultant. So those would likely form the conditions, or the project would be modified to address issues raised in the report.
All right, thank you very much.
Okay.
So as well as an EIS on a major project such as the water main project, there would be a number of other studies that are conducted for the town by outside consultants, correct?
Yes.
Yes, most likely.
And it's just part of the process, and planning or engineering or whoever gets the reports from the consultant and applies that information to the project planning. And none of those other studies that we engage with consultants to do require any sort of secondary review?
No, so the design of the water line, for example, would take into consideration the environmentally sensitive lands that the project is taking through. So conducting the environmental studies and the appropriate engineering designs and project planning are all part of the project scope. Absolutely, and they would not require any other third-party review.
Well, this project that's sparked the request from admin is a pretty good example of how the best laid intention of council in the writing of the MDP can occasionally go awry. I don't think it was council's intent to add another $30,000 or $40,000 to the cost of the taxpayer for projects such as the water main loop. So,
right.
Appreciate administration bringing that forward for discussion, which there doesn't seem to be much of. So,
no, and as we know, if it's in the MDP, it's legislation.
Right. Okay, thanks for your presentation. That I'll move the council give first reading to Bylaw 2018-16 Municipal Development Plan, Municipal Development Amendment, should be Municipal Development Plan Amendment, third-party environmental impact statement, and schedule a public hearing for September 25th at 5 p.m. That's September 25th, 2018 at 5 p.m. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Moving on to item G1, the funding collaboration agreement with Innovate Canmore. Ms. McLeod.
So before you is a request from Innovate Canmore to act as an agent in the partnership agreement with the Calgary Foundation funding application. In October of 2017, Council approved $25,000 in funding as well as in-kind access to the SuperNet if so required by Innovate Canmore to engage in a feasibility study for the process. They are currently working on the implementation of that initial feasibility study, and as a result thereof, Innovate Canmore was set up as a separate not-for-profit outside of the chamber. They are currently working or looking at additional funding to do a more in-depth study and work on their other phases of this project. And the work currently completed at the initial study was the business model, and as I said, the creation of an independent not-for-profit, and work is being done on the economic development analysis and technological model. As part of their ability to apply for additional funding through the Calgary Foundation, hinges on their ability to find an approved agent. An approved agent, according to the Calgary Foundation, would be a municipality or a charitable organization that aligns with what the project is looking to achieve, and the town of Canmore would be one of those entities that would be an approved partner in this. I don't know if council has any questions in regards to the application or to the request from Innovate Canmore. At present, they are, as you know, going to be opening up in the shops of Canmore once that development is complete, and are currently already working with a number of technology startup companies. It's very exciting work that's happening on the back end before their official launch at Small Business Week.
Thank you. I note in the analysis of alternatives that if council were to not support the recommended motion, Innovate Canmore has until tomorrow to secure an alternative option.
Yes.
That's likely a tall order.
I'm assuming it is, and Brian is here to answer any questions that I might not be able to answer as I'm...
No, I don't think we need. I think it's pretty obvious. So
yeah.
Do you happen to know, and it's not that important, I suppose, but I can't think of any other projects of this nature in the town of Canmore that were funded through the Calgary Foundation, or is that, anybody recall any projects? So that's pretty interesting that a project like this would have caught the attention of the Calgary Foundation and also found their partnership on it.
And I think of note is that, you know, if council does agree to become a agent as part of this agreement, that our recommendation is to create a separate agreement with the Canmore, Innovate Canmore, to look at what that looks like and what the requirements are on both ends, because there is, as part of the grant funding, collaboration requirement, and what does the collaboration look like with the town in that regard.
So if I understand it, the commitment from the town would be to process a number of cash
To
flows.
take in the funds,
Yeah.
to funnel through the funds,
And that would likely happen through the finance department.
correct.
Since the manager of finance is here, just get a nod from you that that's minimal work for you, and great. I don't have any other questions. Are there questions from other members of council? See none. Thanks very much for your report.
Thank you.
With that, I'll move to council direct administration to partner with Innovate Canmore to act as an agent on the partnership agreement for their Calgary Foundation grant funding application. I'll speak to the motion. I'm happy to support this motion. I'm very supportive of the work Innovate Canmore is doing to help develop a robust tech sector in the town. And I think the work they've been doing through this past year, or almost 2 years, I suppose, has been quite valuable and successful. I think the $25,000 funding that the town granted recently, that was last year, has been put to good use. I have no doubt that the City of Calgary or the Calgary Community Foundation's funding will also be put to good use to benefit not only the town of Canmore but the region. So I'm happy to support the motion. Is there a discussion on the motion? Seeing none, call the question. Those in favor, opposed, motion's carried unanimously. Item G2, in-house assessment services. Ms. Van Kyn-Pima.
Good evening, Your Worship, members of council. Thank you very much for this opportunity to present my arguments for bringing assessment services in-house. So the recommendation before you for consideration is that council approve the establishment of an in-house assessment services branch within the finance department in accordance with the business plan attached. And in your agenda package is that business plan attached to the request for decision report. So what am I asking approval for? So currently, our assessment services are contracted out, and they have been for a large number of years. And that worked well when we were small, and we couldn't justify that there wasn't just not the workload to have somebody on staff full-time. So the town's growing, and we still continued to contract it out. And so that's not working so great anymore. So during the 2016 budget conversations for the 2017 and 2018 year, at that time we had contractor not be able to fulfill their contract, and so it was sort of up in the air what we were going to do. And verbally during that budget time, I talked about this might be a good opportunity to look at the question of bringing assessment services in-house, because it's something that had been talked about for a number of years. So because of that, the 2018 budget did include some money to allow us to bring assessment services in-house after we had taken a look to see if that was the best approach or if contracting it out still remained the best option. So that's why the 2018 budget is just shy of $202,000. So what would that look like to bring assessment services in-house? Well, that would mean hiring an accredited assessor, because each municipality under the Municipal Government Act is required to have an accredited assessor. That's the only person who can actually file our assessments with the province. They can have assistants who aren't accredited, but you have to have at least one accredited assessor. So the proposal is to hire that person sooner rather than later. And then have that employee assessor work with our current contracted assessor to deliver the assessments that are due by the end of February 2019. And the reason for that is to ensure that there's a smooth transition. When we had that bumpy road in 2016, and even before that, when we had changed contractors, it was really challenging when you have an assessor stop and a new one come in without any kind of transition. Assessment support position is the next thing to be hired, and I'm proposing to do that after the assessments are into the province at the end of February, but still within the first quarter of 2019. And that's in your written report. It tells you about how I did talk to the director of corporate services, the manager of corporate services with the town of Cochrane, and they had done the analysis of in-house versus contracted, and what they had found was a study that recommended taking a look at the number of tax rolls that have to be assessed and what's sort of the maximum volumes that any one assessment person could handle. And by looking at that, it appears that we would need at least 2 people, given the number of tax rolls that we have in the town of Canmore. But they both don't need to be accredited. So therefore, I see this as a position that's subordinate to the accredited assessor position, but does provide that assessment support. The current contract ends March 1st of 2019, and the thing that I'm proposing this evening would see the creation of an assessment and taxation branch with this accredited assessor reporting directly to me as the manager of financial services, have the support position report to them, as well as have our property tax coordinator underneath that as well, so that we do create the branch within the finance department. And in the proposed business plan, there is a graphic to show you what that might look like. So why? Told you what, now why? Property taxes are the #1 source of income for the town. So we need to make sure that we're doing the best job we can for making sure it's as accurate as possible, that it's correct as possible. The other problem is that with a contractor, we're not their sole source or their sole focus. They have contract to more than one municipality, and all municipalities need the same level of work done at exactly the same time of the year. So that's something, if you bring it in-house, that you have that dedicated person to be working only on Canmore's assessments. That person is available to answer just the Canmore questions instead of trying to spread themselves out thinly. It also gives, with an in-house assessment services, the response to taxpayer queries is better. Faster results. The assessor would know the community because they theoretically would live here. And it also that builds relationships with the taxpayers and the business owners. So one thing is assessments for businesses are to be an income-based approach where at all possible. So surveys are sent out, they don't always come back. At least that way, if we have an in-house assessor, they can build that relationship and work on it throughout the year to get the income information that we need in order to ensure that our assessments are as accurate as possible. An in-house assessor can spend more time inspecting properties to make sure that they can take a look at what the condition is. That helps to make the assessment value better, more accurate. And the other thing is that with assessment services being in-house, we can expand the services that we get from that person. So one of the big things that's coming up is, okay, what's the projected taxes from growth each year? And I keep hearing that. And it's a little bit more challenging when to get it from a contractor rather than having somebody in-house. Or economic development might need to know what are the assessment growths in certain commercial areas of town. And overlap is essential, and the contract expires soon. That's another reason why. So what's the cost? So I'm looking at the current contracted assessor. The cost in 2018 is $152,000. To do the overlap would be $30,000 in 2019. And then there's a computer and a desk for the accredited assessor, a computer and a desk, some reconfiguration of office space for the support position. And then estimate when somebody's accredited, they usually have professional fees, they usually have an educational requirement, so there would be some education and training component as well as professional membership fees. And then what are the staffing costs? So the staffing costs in 2018 are just for the couple of months of the accredited assessor. 2019 sees a full year of the accredited assessor and 10 months of the support person, and then in 2020 you see the full cost. I assumed a 3% COLA. That's why there's an increase in staffing costs. So as you can see, it's a slightly higher total cost than what we currently have under contracted services. But I feel that it's a significant increase in the level of service that we're going to be receiving. So for those reasons, that's my recommendation, and I would welcome any questions that you have.
Thank you. Now, in the past, well, today, the work that the assessor does for the town under contract is, it's a provincially mandated and directed process, correct?
Well, the province requires the assessment, and then there are, just like a lot of other professions, there's actually assessor's manual, and they have to actually follow the requirements of the assessor's manual.
So how much of the contracted assessor's work is directed by the province?
They have parameters in which they have to work. So for example, the province actually audits the assessor's work, and the values that they come in have to be within 5% of what they say is the average sales number. So the province, they have to make sure that they come in and their assessed values are within that range, 5% over or 5% under. But the province wouldn't come in and say, oh, well, you know, you have to assess the strip mall over there in this manner. They don't get involved to that degree.
I guess where I'm going is the province monitors at least the work of assessors across the province?
Yes.
Whether they're contracted or employed by the municipality?
Yes.
So the overseeing of that work wouldn't change from the provincial perspective?
Correct. So as a professional accountant, I actually have a higher thing that I'm have to be accountable to that actually trumps my job with the town of Canmore. And there's a set of ethics that the Chartered Professional Accountants Association has out, and I'm expected to comply with that. So the same thing would be with the assessor, with their certification. First and foremost, they have to comply with that, and then they would comply with their employers.
So if there was some concern within some parts of the community that an assessor that works for the community directly would be padding the assessments to raise more taxes, that there's controls that would prohibit that?
That would not be possible, because the province doesn't just sort of pick a municipality here and there to audit. They actually audit it right at the time that the data is filed. And if it's outside of the statistical parameters, then the assessor and myself get notified, and that has to be corrected.
Great. And you noted, which I think, CEO, Ms. DeSoto, you have a point to make?
Sorry, yes, I just wanted to supplement Ms. Van Kuypen-Pima's response to that question, because first and foremost, the town, through the budgeting process, sets the amount that needs to be collected by tax. And then assessments are done and distributed. So there wouldn't be a process whereby you pad assessments to collect more tax, because the tax is total tax is set before.
That's an assumption out there.
Yeah, so I think it's important that we clarify that it doesn't, the assessments could triple in Canmore and we would still collect the same amount of tax community-wide, right?
You bet.
Based on the mill rate.
For sure. But I think the point that you'd made, Ms. Van Kuypen-Pima, in your presentation, that having the assessor in-house would allow for more time spent on different property and checking out a property to make sure the assessment is accurate. So right now we have, I mean, the assessor that does the work for the town of Canmore does work for other municipalities as well, right?
That's correct. And so right now, their inspection rate is 20% per year. of properties. But if you can bring assessment services in-house, then you have a dedicated person to perhaps increase that. So right now it's once every 5 years at 20%. I know you can increase that frequency, which is actually better for both the taxpayer and the town, because at the end of the day, we just want to make sure everybody's assessments are as accurate as we possibly can make them.
Great, thank you. Councillor Seeley.
Thank you, Your Worship. So if we don't do this, it looks to me like in the report that the contractor won't be able to keep up, is getting too big and it's too onerous, and so we're getting high value by bringing it in-house and adding 2 people, and we're getting more value for that. Is that a correct assumption?
Yes. I wouldn't say that the contractor can't keep up. The expectation is that you meet the requirements of the contract, and so I'm not saying that the contractor's not meeting those needs.
But it would be difficult, and it's getting harder as more is put in the funnel.
It just puts a lot of pressure on at one time of the year when you have all of your customers requiring exactly the same thing at exactly the same time. It's harder to meet that.
So this would be a more well-rounded opportunity,
I just think we'll get more bang for our buck.
Sure. Okay. Thank you.
Not that long ago, you finished? I remember there was this discussion about the possibility of perhaps sharing an assessor with the town of Banff or something. But assuming that through the work you've done more recently, that's become clear that that wouldn't work any better.
Yeah, so what we have done for a number of years is we did a regional request for proposals for assessment services. And so we did partner with the town of Banff and the municipal district of Bighorn and put out an RFP jointly and hired an assessor jointly, and that assessor provided assessment services for all 3 municipalities. Then in 2016, when we had troubles with the latest one that we hired regionally, Banff at that time said, you know, we'd like, this isn't working, this regional collaboration, we'd like to go on our own. And also they felt at that time that they had enough work, that there wasn't sort of an economy of scale by forming a regional collaboration.
So currently the town of Banff, do they contract still?
Yes.
So it's not in-house?
And the MD of Bighorn does as well.
Contracts out?
Yes.
The town of Canmore, if the town of Canmore moves forward with this recommendation, it would have no effect on the town of Banff or the MD of Bighorn in terms of their contracting position?
Each municipality has their own separate contract with a contractor. So we wouldn't be leaving the other 2 municipalities floundering because we each have our own separate contracts.
So the one part of this that I've had a hard time wrapping my head around is understanding that we've had one assessor or an assessor and the assessor's team, I suppose, doing 3 municipalities, well, town of Banff, town of Canmore, and the MD, and now we would be having in-house 2 people to do only the town of Canmore. I mean, if one contractor could do all 3 municipalities, why would we need 2 to do just the town of Canmore?
That contractor wasn't doing it by themselves.
That's sort of the question, I guess.
Second of all, there's been an increase in tax rolls, but it would be up to the assessor, and even our current contractor brings in help.
Do you have any idea how many others would work with the assessor on the contracts for the town of Banff, Canmore, and the MD?
I don't know recently with the town of Banff, because I'm not privy to that information, but I know our current contractor will bring in 2 to 3 people to help in addition to themselves.
And that's to do the work in Canmore?
Yeah, Canmore and whatever other contracts they have. The other challenge is that there's a lot more things that would be beneficial that isn't getting done right now. So inspection frequency, the liaison with the different departments. It's much easier if you have an expert in-house to be able to get information that can be used in other departments for the town that just simply is not as available through a contractor.
Right. Are there any questions from other members of council at this time? Councillor Comfort?
Thank you for your presentation, Ms. Bankheim-Bima. I just had a question about, in your chart, you didn't really anticipate any more revenue coming in from this. Were there any savings to be had if we complete it sooner, like more efficiencies? Were you able to calculate that sort of thing?
So assessment services isn't a revenue generation in the same sense as aquatics. So as Ms. DeSoto had said, we collect X amount of dollars because that's what the budget says, and then the assessment is just a way to cut up that pie. So as far as efficiencies go, it would be early days. I wouldn't know.
I'm just trying to see what a clear reason, I guess, why we would go from the current arrangement of having a contractor to an in-house person or persons. And did your costs include benefits as well?
Yes, they did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I figured, but.
Yeah. You know, I think it's...
Is it a matter of offering, what it seemed to be was a matter of offering better service to the taxpayers and property owners?
Yes, as well as internally and council as well. Because somebody is there, they can be more responsive, more quickly. They live in the community, they get to know the community better. They also have an opportunity to really get to know the properties that are in the town and making sure that the assessed values are as accurate as they possibly can because they build up that familiarity. We did have that with our former contractor who lived here. Our current contractor doesn't live here, but it's not a requirement, right? And so I know a lot of the benefits are intangible, and I basically went to the Cochrane report to see what they found, and they found it was actually, they wished that they had done it sooner.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Hillstead.
Thank you for your report. So one of the functions that they would do is defend assessed values at Assessment Review Board and Municipal Government Board hearings as required. So do we have any issue with the current contractor with them meeting that demand, or are we finding that is that much of a demand right now?
So that is part of assessments. When you come up with the assessed value, you are required to defend them in front of an Assessment Review Board, and that's in the current contractor's contract. It's not been an issue, but sometimes what happens is, so people have 60 days after the assessment notice to appeal their assessments. And what we try and do is try and work with people to understand what their points are so that we don't actually have to hold an Assessment Review Board hearing. And so there is a back and forth with the assessor. We encourage people to contact the assessor first so they can understand how the assessor came up with their value, and then to provide their arguments to the assessor because maybe there's something the assessor wasn't aware of. So there isn't a problem with the current contractor. I just think that the responsiveness, the timeliness of that could be done quickly, more quickly.
Thank you.
Any other questions from Ms. Bankheim-Bima? Seeing none, thanks very much for your report.
Thank you.
With that, I will move the council approve the establishment of an in-house assessment services branch within the Finance Department in accordance with the business plan as presented. And I'll speak in support of the motion. More and more we talk, at least in the Civic Center with administration and council and in the community, about how the town of Canmore it's not a small town anymore. We're growing. The fact that there's 9,400 tax rolls is fairly indicative of how much growth has occurred, well, over the last decade. But we continue to do business like a small town, like we did 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And I think across the spectrum of the work the town does as a municipality, we have to reassess how it is that we deliver the services. I think this is it's a reasonable suggestion to bring that service in-house. It's clear that even though there's a slight increase in cost per annum, the return is significant. The availability of having the in-house assessor 12 months of the year will, I'm sure, prove beneficial, not only to the town but to the property owners. So I'm happy to support this motion. Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. I too would be happy to support this motion. I think we've been talking about this longer than last budget year, Ms. Van Kamp-Heijma. I recollect maybe 2014 being popped up as flagged as a possibility that we needed to consider coming down the road, and so I've been actually wondering at what point this would come forward. So I do believe that there'll be better service to our constituents, better service inward-facing within the departments themselves, and a better accurate representation of our assessment to the provincial government as well as other bodies. So I'd be happy to support this. Thank you.
Councillor Stanford.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Ms. Van Kamp-Heijma, for the presentation. It was very clear, your information that you provided on the tax roll numbers and the sheer volume of work that this entails. I also think it was good that you went to other municipalities to find out about their experience with hiring an in-house assessment person, and having the support for that person also I think is a good thing. So I would be very happy to support this recommendation because I think it's timely and I think it's probably overdue, as Councillor McCallum mentioned. So thank you.
Is there any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Moving on then to item G3, the Assessment Review Board, board member appointments. Ms. Van Kamp-Heijma.
Good evening. So the next item that I have before you for your consideration is the appointment of 3 public members to the Assessment Review Board. So on September the 17th is the local Assessment Review Board hearing for 2 assessment appeals. And at the time, Council in October has their organizational meeting and they appoint the trained members to the Assessment Review Board. And at that time, they appointed 3 people who are trained. All 3 are councillors for the town of Canmore. And then the MGA says now that you can't have more than 1 councillor on an Assessment Review Board. So we did the mad scramble and found 2 people who are willing and able to come and sit on September the 17th. And that is Deborah Petrick of Calgary and Lori Renich of Okotoks. So they will be here on the 17th. But they can't actually sit on our board unless you appoint them. So this evening I'm asking you to appoint them. Also, former councillor Sean Krausert is still trained and his accreditation, and I'd like him available just in case something happens. At least he's someone we could phone. I recognize that his schedule is very busy and he's not often available, but it's much easier if I can call him without having to come back again to get him appointed. So that kind of concludes my presentation. I hope you would consider appointing these 3 people.
Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. I had a question about this. So clearly these are people that perhaps were in the same situation, were trained in their own home communities, and No?
Well, they couldn't be counselors, so they were probably trained in their home communities. They were members of the public, not counselors.
Okay, gotcha.
And so they can come. So we could train public in Canmore, and
But-
they could sit on our review board.
But can we loan our own trained counselors out to other municipalities that would require an ARB
Yes,
member?
but only one member of the ARB can be a counselor. It doesn't say a counselor of the municipality in which the board hearing is. It says a counselor.
Counselor in general, interesting.
Yes, and that's the challenge, because a
That's
lot of
problematic.
municipalities have trained just counselors.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. That was the first question that sort of popped up. I was wondering if we could play loansies.
That's what I originally had been talking to Banff and the MD of Bighorn, and we thought, great, we'll collaborate regionally and we'll share, and no.
And have we checked with municipal affairs to see if that was actually their intent?
I don't think that that was their intent. I think their intent was that the
Not be a
counselor
home
in the
counselor.
municipality.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
I don't recall if we ever had appointed to the ARB residents of other communities. This is a departure, isn't it? And I understand the rationale, but I don't think there's ever been somebody from outside of Canmore appointed to our
No.
ARB.
I don't think so, but I don't see that being a problem, because it's not a matter of needing to know Canmore, it's just needing to know the legislation and how one's to conduct oneself when making a decision.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I don't think it's an issue at all. Are there questions for Ms. Van Kuypen-Pima? See none, thanks for your presentation.
Thank you.
That I'll move the council appoint the following additional certified assessment review board members to the 2018 Assessment Review Board, with terms expiring at council's 2018 annual organizational meeting, which is in a month. Presumably they'll be reappointed, but Deborah Petriuk of Calgary, Lori Renich of Okotoks, and Sean Cressford of Canmore. Is there a discussion on the motion? See none, I'll call the question. Those in favor, opposed, motion's carried unanimously. We're just ticking right along here. I guess we'll move into the meat. Item G4, development permit application for 120 Kananaskis Way residential rental apartment direct control district. Ms. Wojtenko.
Just get the presentation going first.
Okay.
Sorry for the delay. Good evening, members of council. I'm here tonight to present to you the development permit application putting forward by Sunstone Resorts for 120 Kananaskis Way for a residential apartment building. within a direct control district. I'm sure you're all familiar with the direct control district that was just approved by council. I'll just point out that we also do have a representative of Sunstone Resorts in the council chambers tonight, as well as the engineer from McElhaney, which has been dealt with on this project. So the recommendation coming forward from administration is that council approve DP 2018-110 for a 159-unit apartment subject to the conditions set out in Schedule A. Just a quick run over of the site. It is on the west end of Kananaskis Way. It's adjacent to Mystic Springs, and then also the Coast Hotel site, which has also just recently had development permit approval. Kind of hard to see, but these are all in your the package that you did receive, so it might be easier to read there. This is a site plan showing you part of an application is a plot plan done by a surveyor, just to make sure that all the side yards and everything is compliant. So this is the plot plan. One thing I'd really like to highlight, it shows really well on this plan, is where the registered road right-of-way is. It kind of forms that hard corner. Through the negotiations with the applicant following the approval of the DC district and looking at how that kind of elbow could be improved, the roadway for pedestrian access. That area of land was added into the site. There is no building on it that you can see. Setbacks are still from that property line, but to make that a more comfortable environment, that's the area of road that has been added into the site for the purposes of landscaping and providing extra parking. And so this plan really shows those off-site improvements. Again, sorry it's small, but that sidewalk going down to Bow Valley Trail is quite long. So you can see on the north end of the property, in what we have is a municipal reserve, a 5-meter wide right-of-way. Or sorry, it's not a right, it's like a right-of-way, but it's actually a municipal reserve strip. The developer has been required to build a 2.5-meter asphalt trail, typical of Town of Canmore standards, all the way from the east side of their site all the way to Old Canmore Road. But the other addition where I was talking about in the road right-of-way is that there'd be a nice bend in the road created, and there would be sidewalks built all the way from this site down to connect to Bow Valley Trail. There currently are a few sidewalks here and there along that section, but it isn't consistent. So this would provide one consistent sidewalk the whole way down.
Just on this diagram, it looks like on the curve there, is that like concrete or where the west line of the road curves around? Is there some sort of a curb there? Because inside of that is, as you know, additional parking.
So people do park in that space now. So that parking would be removed, and that becomes landscaping and visitor parking, actual visitor parking stalls. Was that your question?
Perhaps. So this is showing the ultimate curb design, that radius that...
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So now I'm going to run through how the development permit proposal aligns with the direct control district that council just approved. And I'll cover all of these issues. So use and density. Apartment buildings are permitted use in the direct control district. Density, it does, the number of units, 159, fits within the density range. For site coverage, yards and setbacks. Oh, actually, sorry, I'm just going to point out that for this permit, there's 20 studio units, 83 one-bedroom units, and 56 two-bedrooms. And this is a copy of the site plan, and you'll see that if you can read small writing, but it does meet the requirements of the DC district for all the site coverage, yard setbacks, and floor area ratio. This is one of the elevations of the building. It's the north elevation, and just showing, it's hard to see, but there's two dotted lines at the top of the plan. Those are two potentially allowed building heights. The one on the bottom is the requirement of the DC district. So you can see that the building does meet the height requirements. This illustration shows massing. It is a requirement to show massing with adjacent buildings. So Mystic Springs is on the right-hand side and the future Coast building is on the left-hand side. So given the future development, the massing does fit in with the either existing or proposed development. This illustration is showing the roof plan. One of the requirements of the DC district is that none of the roof planes exceed a certain length. So this diagram is showing just that the roof does meet that requirement of the DC district. Here's some more building elevation drawings. I think there's 3, one of each side, just to show the articulation of the building, the roof, and the height. One of the requirements as well was for large eaves, and the building does have that. Instead of providing a material sample board, we have got kind of a sample board digitally, and so you can see all of the proposed materials to be used on the building, and they do meet with the guidelines in the land use bylaw. So that's kind of the building. Now I'm going to move on to some of the site requirements of the DC district. So first off is vehicle parking. This development is a DC district. One of the main reasons is to get reduced parking requirements. And so the DC district itself writes in what the parking requirements are, and they are less than the general requirements. In exchange for that, Council did ask for increased pedestrian facilities and amenities and cyclist facilities and amenities, so I'll cover those afterwards. But the parking that would have been required based on the DC district would have been a total of 158 stalls. The developer has provided 175 stalls, and some of those stalls came up with the extra visitor parking in that area behind kind of that elbow area, so there was additional space to provide visitor parking.
And that, in the report, it references having negotiated, somewhere it says that. So that's what the reference is, that there was through some negotiation that additional development was taken on by the developer?
Yes. Yes.
And that accommodated how many extra stalls?
6 visitor parking stalls up front.
Right. Okay.
I think currently in that area, I often see 6 to 8 vehicles parked when I ride by there. Sometimes larger vehicles. Yeah, so they have provided additional stalls. So the requirement would have been 158. They have provided a total of 175 stalls, plus the loading stall in the rear. For bicycle parking, there's quite a large requirement, the biggest we've ever asked for in the town of Canmore. And so that resulted in a total of 256 bike parking stalls being required, with 159 of those being indoors. The applicant has proposed to provide 262 stalls for bicycles, with 208 of those indoors. The indoor bike parking, so in the middle of the building, accessible from a door on the main floor, there's 2 large bike storage rooms. One has 48 stalls and the other, I think, is 82 stalls. And the second location for indoor bike parking is in the basement of the parkade. When you drive into your parking stall, in front there is a, you can see it on the bottom, there's a rack where you could hang 1 to 2 bicycles.
And in the report, it indicated that some of those would be in those racks for hanging the bike on would be in front of parked cars?
Yes, they'd be in front of the parked cars.
So on a sort of day-to-day basis, how would that work? I mean, could the stalls, later in the report, it suggested the stalls wouldn't be assigned to people, so it's hit and miss? So
That's correct.
if you ride your bike in, you just throw it on whatever rack is available and it's not connected to your car or your stall?
That's correct.
And the racks hold 2 bikes?
That's the design, yes. I think maybe depending on the bicycle, if you have a really large fat bike, it might be challenging to get another bike on, but the intent is for 2 bicycles per rack.
I don't want to drill down to minute details, but can bikes be locked onto those racks?
It appears so, yes. And in the conditions of approval, it said to use tamper-free bolts in the installation of those racks.
I can imagine people in Canmore with their $8,000, $10,000 bikes not wanting to hang them there.
Yeah, I could see that being used for more daily cruisers and...
The townies.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. This is a copy of the landscaping plan. They do meet all of the requirements for landscaping. They did include that area in the road right-of-way as part of the landscaping. But what the town of Canmore has said is that we're going to let you use this space, but you need to have a road use kind of agreement with us, as well as a long-term maintenance agreement, so that the town of Canmore isn't responsible for maintaining that landscaping in that area.
And the plantings would all meet town regulations or requirements for types of vegetation and like no fruit bearing?
Yes.
Not going to put a bunch of crabapple trees there, right?
No. So we did go through the landscaping plan. It was created by a landscaping architect, and the species were checked for our OK species list. Yeah. The other thing that's shown on the landscaping plan is kind of in the middle, is a natural, or is a children's play area. So as a requirement of the DC district, they must put in a playground area. And there's also requirement for public art within the landscaping. But the applicant has requested, and there is a letter in your application package from the applicant, requesting that the public art, like the actual installation of it, be allowed to be approved at a later date. And so rather than coming back to council, it's proposed that council put a condition in the approval of the permit that the actual art piece could be approved by the development officer, such as myself, in consultation with the Public Art Committee. And there's also a condition in there that the art would need to be installed prior to obtaining development completion certificate.
Do we know, or does the developer have any idea what the location might be for their public art?
The public art, yeah, you can see the mouse.
Right there?
Yeah.
And so presumably they're thinking like three-dimensional plaza scale sort of art?
I haven't got an idea yet
Okay.
from the applicant, but they are
Nobody
here tonight
knows.
if you wish to ask
Okay.
further questions.
But the Public Art Committee will be involved in that.
That's correct.
Right.
Yeah.
Dr. Caudill.
Thank you, Your Worship. But actually, this is my error because I didn't check I made a note to check this and I didn't. But we actually would like that removed from Public Art Committee to the Arts and Events Supervisor. Currently, we don't have a framework for the Public Art Committee to make this kind of decision. So what we'd like to do is have the Arts and Events Supervisor work with the Supervisor of Planning to create a framework for that kind of decision going forward. But for the purposes of this application, the Public Art Committee may in fact be involved, but it's really the Arts and Events Supervisor who needs to lead that on behalf of council at this point.
So that's condition
It's
number
condition 20, and it's my error for not catching it.
So strike Public Art Committee and put in
Arts and Events Department or Supervisor.
I think department.
Whatever works better, yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay. What works better for administration?
Having the word department, we often don't refer to a single person, but to Town of Canmore Engineering Department.
So Arts and Events Department?
Thank you, Sally. And the last thing on the landscaping plan that you'll notice is the other common amenities that the applicant has proposed. So at the front of the building, again, there's a barbecue kind of dining area, as well as a covered seating area, like covered with a pergola. And that's part of the common amenity space requirement, either private or common. So they've provided quite a large area, as you can see in the landscaping plan, with public space or common space. The pedestrian amenities I did touch on already. So this is just a blow up of that asphalt trail that would be provided to the north side of the property. Currently there is kind of a gravel, well, it's not even really gravel right there. It's more of a dirt and root trail. So this would be formalizing that trail into asphalt. The connection of that to the west to the underpass, the town of Canmore would look at finishing that at a later date. This is a very detailed engineering drawing of the sidewalk connection on Kananaskis Way from the development site down to Bow Valley Trail. And as you can see, the smaller box diagram there showing a semi-truck shows that with the configuration of that curb and the sidewalk, you can still get large vehicles around that corner. Some of the other general requirements that we have, and these aren't in the direct control district themselves, but they're the requirements of the land use bylaw, is for utility servicing. The engineers, our department, have reviewed all the engineering drawings. They don't have any concerns with any of the utility servicing. With garbage and recycling, you can see on the landscaping plan as well in the site plan that the developer has proposed waste receptacles, town of Canmore style, and easily accessible to the residents. And that was also reviewed by our solid waste service manager. Emergency access has been referred to the fire department. There is, on the south portion of the property, there is an easement for access through to the coast site. So that easement has been maintained and an asphalt road proposed to go through, and that asphalt road is proposed to be built to the standard of having a fire truck, a town of Canmore fire truck driven down it. So there will be bollards. So that road won't be able to be used by anyone. It'll be fire department access only, and it's a requirement of the coast permit to put those bollards in. With mail, the developer has proposed a mail room on the main level. Canada Post has their own requirements for delivery standards for how you design your mail rooms, so they will be required to comply with those. Lastly, there was a noise study submitted. The land use bylaw requires that any development or residential development next to the Trans-Canada Highway submit a noise report, and the recommendations out of that report did come up with how much kind of sound reducing the building needs to be to meet our standards. Again, I've already spoken a bit to the public art. And off-site levies. The MGA only allows collection of off-site levies for anything once, so in this area, levies were collected for the majority of Town of Canmore works, except for road improvements, which are newer. And so of those off-site levies, only $243,506.91 are to be paid to the Town of Canmore at the signing of development agreement. So the recommendation is that Council approve DP 2018-110 for a 159-unit apartment, subject to the conditions set out in Schedule A. There are 24 conditions. I'm not going to speak to all of them, but if Council has any questions of those, also please note that Condition 20 would change again, or the recommendation is to change that from the Public Art Committee to Arts and Events Department.
Do you need that as part of the motion, or is it accomplished already?
I think that needs to be part of the motion because it's changing the conditions that I've set out.
Okay.
I'd be happy to answer any questions if Council has any.
Sure. Just looking firstly at the report, under the parking section of the report, the second page of the report, which details the stalls per unit and the parking provided. And I was just curious how it would have played out in regards to parking on site if the DC district had not reduce the parking requirements. So if this project was coming forward under the usual parking requirements for a large multi-family development.
Yeah, sure. So this is the table that you have in your staff report where the parking required is 158 stalls. They've provided 175. The general parking requirements as they stand today in the land use bylaw would have required 206 stalls to be provided. So that's an extra 31 parking stalls.
Which I calculate as being approximately 1 stall for every 5 units in the building. So, to put it in context, I mean, it's interesting to see how this plays out because we talked a lot about reducing the parking requirements at the time. And certainly the additional density was prime motivator, and now we can see how this is playing out. It's an interesting exercise to understand that. But in my mind, an extra stall for every 5 units is not a huge number of stalls that we're not seeing brought forward. Councillor Seeley?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah. Ms. Wojtenko, when you look at the specific conditions under 19, the noise mitigation, just wondering about other places that are there and what noise mitigation might look like and what follow-up would be required to make sure that it's enjoyable and that's been dealt with.
Mm-hmm. So some of the recommendations come out of the noise report, but it's generally to do with like building wall construction and technical things that I'm not that familiar with. But so what we would ask for is a report to show that they have taken that into consideration through the building permit process.
And other properties might have the same thing. Maybe mitigation has already been done with those.
Alaric's probably more familiar with some of them, but depending on the building shape and form will depend on what the noise, like how it attracts the noise. But Alaric, do you want to speak to other developments right there?
The single biggest sort of vulnerability to noise is windows. And so the quality of windows is generally the biggest component that needs to be addressed in the design of the building. It was a bigger issue 20 and more years ago with the quality, especially of green building, the town's requirements, what this building is trying to achieve. The quality of windows is now one of the added benefits both environmentally is also sort of livability is much quieter. So it's almost exclusively the windows.
Okay, thank you.
So speaking of noise, so in the report itself, the section on noise, it notes the development has showed the exterior noise levels not to exceed 55 dBA. And then it says, or 24-hour LEQ, and what does that mean? Anyone?
Eller might want to explain it better, but it's the way that you measure noise. And it's not a simple formula, like it's
So the
super complex.
Exterior noise is measured in one way and interior is measured in a different way. And I guess that's what Mr. Fish was talking about in regards to the windows cutting down on the interior noise.
Mm-hmm.
And what about the exterior noise?
So even in the report, with the exterior noise, you can't change that. So the interior is where the major benefits can come.
So, sorry, it just took me a moment to find the clause. The development must show that the exterior noise levels do not exceed that rating inside the building. So I suppose it's a little bit silly, but if the noise is coming from inside the building because your neighbors are having a party, that's not the issue here. The issue is exterior noise, i.e. the highway, shouldn't be audible at the levels of 55 decibels. I can't remember what the LEQ stands for. It's an engineering measure of the acoustic levels.
So that's a measurement within the living unit?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Oh, I see. Okay. So on page 3 of the report, it talks about the applicant being encouraged to rent or sell parking separately from the dwelling units. So how does that work? What does that look like? So typically, you rent an apartment, you're assigned a stall or two. That's not going to happen here?
That's the intent, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So the apartment manager, the owner, could generate revenue by renting. I can't imagine them selling the stalls.
No, to sell a stall, you need to condominiumize.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's noted in the report. I guess that's for future reference, or I don't know. Well, the report says the applicant is encouraged to rent or sell parking separately from the dwelling unit. But selling it doesn't make sense.
Sorry, where on the report are you reading that?
First paragraph on page 3.
Yes. You're correct. The intent is not to sell the parking stalls. The intent is, I mean, the building will not be condominiumized or additional parking is required. So I think that's a direct quote out of the transportation impact assessment that may not have picked up on the nuance of the building being rented. The key is to assign a cost to the parking. As if you have 2 vehicles, you're going to pay a lot more than if you have 1. If you have no vehicles, there is an additional saving. Conversely, the idea to have parking that's not too tightly tied to a certain unit is it increases the efficiency of parking in terms of if a vehicle is only in a parking spot for half of a 24-hour period, it is potentially available for someone else. So those are the competing balances that some of the transportation impact assessment is trying to recommend.
So arguably, you could play it in a few ways, one of which is great. It could also arguably, people might decide to save some money and not park on site and just park out on the roadway, which is pushing the parking out to the roadway. And I suppose it's possible that somebody could rent an apartment there, somebody that has several vehicles, and they could rent, who knows, 4 or 5 vehicle or parking stalls, which would defeat the purpose of what we're trying to encourage there. So I don't know how to, I mean, that's not for us to manage, but I'm not convinced that this will play out the way we hope it will. Councillor Sanford?
Thank you, Worship. Yes, I did have a question about the parking as well, and I think you clarified that the parking stalls are not for sale because they're not subdivided or condominiumized.
That's correct.
But I think the transportation plan suggests to unbundle parking from the unit so that if you don't have a car, you don't pay for parking.
Yep.
If you do have a car, you pay an extra $50 a month or whatever, which is very common in high-density cities to do that.
Yep.
So that makes the parking more efficient. But as you say, if people just choose to push the parking problem out onto the street, then there'll have to be some factor considering that as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that the transportation master plan does suggest that as a phenomenon or a possibility, but in this particular case, because it's strictly rental, that might be less or more restrictive to this particular property. So yeah. I hope that it does work, and even unbundling the parking could be a good benefit for these people because there's much more pedestrian and bicycle access and incentive to be pedestrian and bicycle in this particular property. So that might be a good way to trial it.
Yeah, I would hope that the building manager would monitor the use and build up some data. I mean, if it becomes obvious that there's people living in the building that have a vehicle and aren't parking on site, then we may want to reconsider that sort of direction. I don't know.
I mean, it becomes an operational decision of the owner as well as the people who are renting the units where they choose to park. But if there are infractions and you start getting tickets or there's nowhere to park, then I assume that it would become, something that either the management of the unit or the building would take care of and try to make that more user-friendly for their tenants. Yeah. Or the tenants would request something different.
Councillor McCallum?
Thank you, Your Worship. So the developer's planning on renting the vehicle stalls, which I get. Bike stalls will be free, correct?
That's correct. And I'm not sure that the developer has the intent of renting those at the moment.
Okay.
So
it's just
that would be a question for the developer. That was something that
recommendation.
was in the TIA as a recommendation, but it hasn't been strictly written that is what the developer intends to do.
Right.
Yeah.
I just wanted to ensure, I don't have a problem with parking being decoupled. What I am concerned is that at what point we make a decision to restrict off-street or on-street parking. And that was, I think, when we brought up the whole idea of the parking, my bigger concern actually was how do we encourage the right behavior that we want? If you're renting a 2-bedroom apartment and it has 1 parking stall, you come with 1 vehicle to park and maybe 4 bikes. And then I guess my question is that, so if this doesn't play out the way, over a period of time, is this something revisited, that we can revisit?
Not anything that Town of Canmore Council can revisit, no.
Except decide to restrict off-street?
That's correct.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, that's helpful. Can I talk to you about personal amenity space?
Yes, you may.
Which?
Personal amenity space. So, beautiful building, beautiful balconies, some of them larger, some of them smaller, and beautiful pictures. And so I noted that with the peaks over in, which is confusing, over in Palliser, I had an opportunity to visit one of their suites last week. They're beautiful, but I did notice that The balconies, they're small. They're not small by any other standard, but they're in line with the size of the units themselves. But there's an air conditioning unit that is taking up substantial space on each and every one of those balconies. And it's sort of, I don't get the point. Why provide a balcony that somebody can only use 70% of? So my question is there a way that we can encourage the developer to either strap, if there's going to be an air conditioning unit, which I understand from my discussion with you by email earlier today there will, to strap it outside of the actual air conditioning or the balcony itself, so that, and the larger balconies I'm not really that worried at, but the smaller ones I am concerned with. In the ones that I saw at Peaks, you could open the door and you might be able to put a small chair there, and that's it. Like there's no, there's no place for plantings or anything like that. It's an awkward thing that requires air around it. And I'm wondering if there's some way we can encourage the developer to make sure that the private amenity space is not inhibited by their infrastructure.
Sure. So I did request that an illustration be prepared to show, and at this stage, the building permit drawings.
It's not at BP, and I understand
so, So from what we understand from the applicant is that the condensing units that they proposed so far are 12 inches deep, 31 inches wide, for a total. So it would essentially take away a foot of the balcony space. I can't answer whether or not the air conditioners can be attached to the outside. I'm not a building safety codes officer. My guess is that they can't, because they're always.
I've seen them in Winnipeg. Brand new buildings.
Brand new buildings. And it may be allowed. So we can check on that. But the one thing in the land use bylaw that we have is the requirement for private amenity space and a minimum. In the land use bylaw, it doesn't say that or it just says balcony. It doesn't say that that balcony shall be 100% usable space. So mechanical equipment hasn't been excluded from calculating that minimum balcony space.
And I think that had the previous development, had I seen it on the drawings or I'd noted it, I would have asked that question then, but it was too late until, and the pictures are for pretty, I get that. Yeah. So you're basically saying there's nothing we can do about it, or?
So what I'm saying is that that's the minimum requirement of the land use bylaw. It doesn't specify that mechanical equipment could be there, but you are council, you are the development authority. Should you choose to write a condition that says something more of like the minimum balcony space provided shall be 4.5 meters squared and shall not include mechanical equipment, etc., you could choose to put that in as a condition. That then would probably require the developer to come up with another option for the air conditioner where they're located, or redesign the building or the balconies to create different private outdoor amenity spaces.
And so is this an example of one of the smallest units and one of the smallest, with the smallest balcony?
Yes, that is.
And it's 10 feet, is that feet?
At 10 feet by 5 feet. It's about 3 meters by 1.5 meters.
If I could just add, not directly but indirectly, I was part of some of the discussions around the Peaks of Canmore.
Peaks of Palliser?
The Northview project.
Peaks of Palliser.
1451 Palliser
It seems
Trail.
unwarm to call it a REIT.
A little part of it was around the aesthetics of it. So I mean, it's a double-edged sword. I guess the livability of the space is important, but also having those air conditioning units on the outside of the building to some is less pleasing. So to sort of quote-unquote hide it on the balcony is appealing. That was a consideration, especially adjacent to the Trans-Canada Highway for the Palliser Trail project. So it's a bit of a trade-off, but your point is taken. I think we need to be cautious about putting in a condition that kind of exceeds the requirement of the bylaw as written. The bylaw as written says 4.5 square meters. This meets that 4.5 square meters.
It defeats the purpose of private amenity
I think the air
space.
conditioner could come in handy. You could set your drinks down on there, like a little side
The
table.
ones that I saw actually have venting up top, so you can't even put anything on top of it. I have thought of all those options. I was like, oh, could you like turn it into a little cocktail table? Like, what could you do? And not possible. So that's why I am asking the question.
The other thing is that the land use bylaw says that for main floors, you have to have a minimum of 15 meters squared, not 4.5 for each unit. And the main floor balconies are the same as the upper levels. So that doesn't meet that requirement. However, the land use bylaw has a little clause that says, at the discretion of the development authority, where you provide good common spaces, will allow you to relax that 15 meters squared on the main level. So as I pointed out before, this development does have quite nice common space amenities as well. So the administration recommendation is to allow for that discretion of smaller balcony spaces on the main level and have that more as a common space rather than larger private spaces. So not the 15 meters squared. So they'd still have to meet the minimum 4.5, but not 15 meters squared. Some of them are 15 meters and they're on each level.
Yeah, and some of them it doesn't matter. It's on the smaller balconies that it matters when they're 500 square foot units, and you might as well not have a balcony at all because you can't even, you have one seat.
So on the...
We're starting to go around in circles here on this one. I'll move on. While you're thinking, I'll give Councillor Sanford the mic.
Thank you, Worship. I just had another question about the common amenity space. In a rental situation, if you were in a condominium, you would be paying to support that amenity. So in a rental situation, what is sort of the formula for the upkeep of the common spaces?
So it's the responsibility of the property management.
And so it would be factored into the cost of the units, the rental?
That's correct, yes.
Because they can't collect any extra money from the renters to outside of their rental contract.
That's correct. So there isn't a reserve fund under provincial law for condominiums. It's just the owner of the building saying, okay, in 20 years I'm going to need to do the roof, so I better make sure that my rent covers the costs of all of that maintenance. So it's done by the building owner versus a bunch of building owners who form a condominium association.
Yeah, so that would be a consideration in a rental property as to what the actual upkeep of all the common areas as well would be.
Yeah.
And you mentioned that the bicycle parking wouldn't have a cost attached to it?
That's
what
I don't believe there is a, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Just before I move on with more questions that I have, we're at that 2-hour mark, and either we take a break now or keep this going. Okay, I'll call a very short break, 6.5 minutes. 6.5.
actually sliding doors as opposed to open, what would you call that?
Like French doors.
Thank you. And so that would totally changes my opinion on the space. As long as that continues through the development permit and development, I'd be happy. Oh, be quiet. It was also brought to my attention, which we haven't done a great job of highlighting within this presentation, is that there's actually a rooftop patio.
I didn't know that.
On the roof plan, it's hard to read. It's a
You're welcome.
rooftop patio, but we'll show you where it is. So you can see that kind of white area is the rooftop patio. Oh, yes.
Nice.
Thank you.
That'll be for the cannabis, no doubt. Whoop, I see. Okay, moving on. I have a couple of questions. So in the bylaw itself, 2 questions. First of all, why does the bylaw have 3.x point everything? Why is there an X in all of the numbering on the bylaw?
That version, so when it got inserted into the land use bylaw itself, it has a different number. Unfortunately, at the time of this, the office consolidation hadn't happened yet. It just happened after I recognized that the bylaw hadn't been inserted. So it wasn't known what number it was going to be at that time.
So it'll always be 3.x.
It was, there's a so the bylaw, the land use bylaw was consolidated and it was added in.
Okay,
yeah,
so
about a week or 2 ago.
Okay, thank you. So in 3.x.7.6, it notes that the animal-proof waste containers must be located and screened from Kananaskis Way. But given the location, is screening required? Because they're not actually, you can't actually see them from Kananaskis Way, can you?
Well, so you can see in this illustration, those are the waste containers.
Yeah.
So from Kananaskis Way, if you really look, you'll see them. But they're not, right up front. They are behind some vegetation. So they haven't exactly been screened. It's not that they're fenced in. So they will be visible, but they're not right in front of Kananaskis Way.
The bylaw says that they have to be screened from Kananaskis Way with natural materials or similar to the satisfaction of the development authority. So I guess it's up to the development authority. I mean, I don't see any screening on that drawing other than surrounding vegetation, but I also don't see that it's an issue because they're not facing really onto Kananaskis Way.
I would agree with that.
I guess, so that's something that council could add as an additional condition if they felt. I think it would be possible to have some screening on the east end, what is the southeast end of that. I think from Kananaskis Way, as proposed and modified, there is quite a bit more natural landscaping that's being added. As Ms. Watenko said, if you look hard from Kananaskis Way, and depending the angle that you're at, you may see the bins, although they're quite recessed or set back from the main traffic and pedestrian area. So that would be up to council if you felt inclined to add a condition to require some additional screening.
Yeah, it's pretty hard to make that call given just these. I can't stand on Kananaskis Way and look at those bins from here. I'll leave it to the rest of council. Looking at this, it would seem to me that the bins would be not quite, but almost invisible from Kananaskis Way. Maybe we, I don't know. I'll leave it that for the rest of council. If somebody wants to add an additional condition or something. Just moving forward in the report to the Transportation Impact Assessment Guidelines. So these are guidelines that the town created, correct?
The guidelines that were which, sorry?
The town created?
Yes. Oh, yeah. So when you prepare TIA, yes.
Right. So we prepared the guidelines. So in the guidelines on page 130 of 156, 5.4.2, off-site parking management. The direction is to outline recommended off-site parking management strategies to be employed on the roadways and developments adjacent to the site. The study area should include Kananaskis Way between Bow Valley Trail and Montaigne Road. So what's come of that direction? Or am I misunderstanding that guideline?
The key there is to look at the overall vehicle, pedestrian, and to some degree bicycling network in the area. And so in considering the entire off-site area, it should include the connection, not just this site, but all the way around to Montaigne Road, sort of to the southeast, and down around Kananaskis Way to Bow Valley Trail. So that all needs to be considered, and that's what resulted in the recommendation for the pedestrian connection to make that connection with Bow Valley Trail, as I understood your question.
This seems specific to off-site parking.
Oh, okay, sorry, yes. Okay, I would have to check the specific response to that.
There was a memo. The TIA initially we felt didn't quite highlight all of those parking management strategies. In the memo, which, sorry, I don't have the package
Is that on page 140 of our report, the response to comment 17?
Yeah, so the updated memo provided more detailed information on those parking management strategies that could or would be employed by the building management.
Okay, so the response to comment 17 that appears in our agenda, at least at page 140, that's the response from the developer to 5.4.2 in the TIA guidelines. Is that what that is?
Sorry, you're hard to hear. Right.
Sorry. Can you hear me over there? Nobody's listening. Nobody's listening anyway. So, on page 140 in the agenda, the response to the comment 17, all of that text, is that the answer, or is that the developer's feedback on the direction in 5.4.2 of the TIA guidelines?
It's the response from the consultant saying these are the strategies that you can employ. At this point in time, I think they're all open for the applicant to choose, and it might be a combination of strategies. And I think at the time of operations, the strategies may change. The applicant may wish to speak to that more if you'd like to hear from them. On the operations side.
Okay, so I think this is leading or connected to some extent to conversation that we were having a short while ago about off-site parking. So there's a number of suggestions in this response to comment 17 about off-site parking management strategies that could be considered in the future and perhaps implemented, such as time restrictions based on peak usages. Well, there's a number of bullet points there. So I'm just trying to be clear from my own understanding that this is the response to the direction in this document about, that speaks directly to the off-site parking management. I mean, that's, I think, the biggest concern that we heard, back at public hearing and everything else on this was around the impact to Kananaskis Way and Montaigne to on-street parking. Recognizing that nobody owns on-street parking.
Yeah, it's up to the town to monitor that and change any on-street parking.
So if we, as we move forward, if we find that there's real issues, there's a number of suggestions in this report, as is there in the transportation management plan that was recently updated, about how to address that increasing congestion of on-street parking.
That's correct.
Just keep nodding.
I mean, often TIAs will come back and say, well, you should put a traffic light in here or a stop sign there. This is different.
Yeah.
It's coming back with suggestions for managing parking.
Well, you know, in considering this before this evening, I was thinking quite a bit about that and wondering if this was a time when we should begin some sort of a trial on permitted resident restricted parking or something, but I don't think this is the right time. But it'll be a good conversation to have, but there's a number of other neighborhoods that have similar issues around congestion. So I'm taking these 2 pages as suggestions of other ways that the town can try to manage that likely growing congestion of parking on the street.
That's correct.
Thank you. Councillor Mara.
Thank you. Thank you for your report. Just going back to the waste and recycling, on page 120 of the report, it does show screened in front of it, along the laneway, the fire lane. I'm assuming that's fire lane. Or on the property, I guess it is.
Sorry, which illustration are you looking at?
On page 120.
I don't see a screen. I think
it's set in this drawing.
Oh, yeah. It's the word says screen, but I don't see any screening. You're correct. Yeah.
No. Okay.
Yeah.
But I'm just curious how it's going to be collected, how the trucks are going to access it.
Yeah. So this has gone through with solid waste. And actually, this drawing on this one, the sidewalks were moved to the back. Yeah, so there it is. So on the landscaping plan, the site plan, I guess, wasn't updated. The landscaping plan here shows the sidewalk was moved to the rear because with these garbage bins, the truck, and you can see there's a vehicle here, so the truck comes up and does dump from the front.
From the front, okay.
Yep. So with the sidewalk, the trucks can still dump the garbage cans, even with the sidewalk there. But because pedestrians walk behind the bins to put the garbage in, it's more comfortable to have the sidewalk at the rear. And then also people that are walking by when the trucks are emptying out the garbage bins, pedestrians still can still use the walkway. So that's why we asked for the walkway to be moved to the back of the garbage bins.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Sorry for the confusion in the drawing. Sometimes things are updated.
Just sort of, no problem.
Just looking at the specific condition 13 is around the installing garbage and recycling facilities was shown on the approved plans. If we just amended that to suggest to finish the sentence with shielding as approved by manager of planning, we can shift that responsibility.
You could say it goes to the development officer to approve any screening. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in the.
Or you could just request that they screen it.
I'm not sure it requires screening, additional screening, given the location, but maybe it will, and I don't think it should come back to the development authority for that.
Council needs to decide whether it wants it screened or not? Because council's the development authority, so you've said the public art must come back and be approved. It's not a, well, it could maybe come back or not. You need to decide if you want that screened and put that into the condition. Within a direct control district, you must give very clear direction of how a development officer approves something in your absence.
If I could just add, I mean, I think the summary is that administration was satisfied that as the waste containers are set back as far as they are from Kananaskis Way, with the improvements of the sidewalk, the new alignment of the road and the landscaping in that area, they will be somewhat visible, but overall administration was satisfied that the waste containers are not the initial item that one would see walking or driving past the site. They are sort of tucked away. So administration was satisfied. If council chooses to change that, as Ms. Witenko said, that's your prerogative.
So you're satisfied that the plan that you've seen meets the intent of 3.x.7.6?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, okay. Good. That's all I need to know. Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Your Worship. Still talking about waste and recycling containers. In the way that this is designed, the truck has to pull in and then back out. Is that correct? Because there's no pull-through?
That's correct.
And our waste department thought that was an okay thing to do? They do that in other situations?
Yes, that's correct. So they actually, I think what they would do is pull up, and then there's the T, kind of a hammerhead before you reach the bollard, and then be able to turn around. In any case, the solid waste services manager was circulated the application and said just make sure that they're level with this certain level. They have to be raised a little bit, and otherwise the location.
So they were more concerned with the alignment of the bins on the site as opposed to the truck access?
Yes.
Okay,
yeah.
Great.
I'm just going to flick through the report one more time and make sure I haven't missed anything I've made a note of. And other members of council have any more questions, comments, you can let me know. Okay, then. If there's no further questions from, she doesn't have her light on, Councillor McCallum.
Can administration remind me if this building is pet friendly or not?
I'm not sure.
Sweet.
The answer was not pet unfriendly.
They allow gerbils. I'll bet you they'll have rabbits up there. On the rooftop. Okay, if there's no further serious questions, thank you for your report and answering all the questions. So at this time, I'll move the council approve DP 2018-110 for 159 unit apartments subject to the conditions in Schedule A amended to reflect in condition number 20 that it's the Arts and Events Department that would be consulted rather than the Public Art Committee. That's the motion. I'll speak to the motion. I'm quite prepared to support the motion, of course. This is something we've been working on for some time. I guess for a year and a half, or it was before the election that this started. Regardless, in the more than 40 years that I've lived in Canmore, up until 2 or 3 years ago, there had been no purpose-built rental buildings in Canmore. And the town of Canmore was trying to address the housing shortage essentially on its own, which isn't really something the municipality is well situated or well set to manage. So to have the private sector begin to work with the town, initially with the Northview REIT property, well actually initially with Coast property, Northview REIT, and now this property on Kananaskis Way, if all of those 3 projects are completed as envisioned, that's approximately 400 new apartment rentals in the market, which is going to make a big difference for the town of Canmore, for the people that live and work here. It was certainly conflicting to some extent within the community, within the Kananaskis Way residential community, the density that we're approving, the additional height, the reduced parking. And I think we all recognize that there can be long-term impact from those relaxations, but in order to get the housing units that the town needs, I think these are reasonable relaxations that council has approved. So I'm looking forward to seeing this property developed and occupied, as well as the Northview property and one day the Coast property. So happy to support the motion, move it forward to the next and hopefully final stage. Councillor Sanford.
Thank you, Worship. I too am happy to support this project. I think I'm really pleased to see how much thought has gone into all of the amenities and the parking and the bicycle access, also the paved pathways and the sidewalks. I think that the developers being very sensitive to the fact that this could be a really wonderful transportation hub for bicycle, vehicle, and pedestrian access. I really wish you all the success, and I hope that the project proceeds, and I'd be happy to support it. Thank you.
Councillor Seeley.
I too will support this, excitedly so. It's been a long time. It's nice to get a private sector solution like this. It's very tasteful, and I think it'll be a great asset for the community, so very happy to support it.
Councillor McCallum.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I'd be very happy to support this well and deeply needed supply of market rental housing in our community. I appreciate all the thought and response to concerns from council through the process. It's pedestrian and bike friendly, it's family friendly, it has great resident amenities, it's got great private amenities, it's apparently not pet unfriendly, and the residents of that building will have the Shops of Canmore as part of their own sort of private mall next door, which is kind of cool. And I do think that we're going to end up seeing a few impacts from the parking arrangements, but this is our first kick at this cat. And the only way to identify what the rub is to allow a little bit of rubbing to happen. So we may find ourselves having to take some measures down the road, but I'm really excited to see this project move forward, and I'm excited to go to my first house party here. Thank you.
Councillor Mara.
I too am very happy to support this project. I think the developer has been very mindful of everything, and I look forward to seeing it. I work only a half a block away from there, and yeah, I look forward to seeing and coming down the pathway, and it's sort of a hodgepodge of vehicles being parked there now, so I'm looking forward to seeing a nice development and green space. So thank you.
Councillor Comfort.
I don't have very much to add. I particularly liked, I also have a concern about the parking, but it is what it is, and we need those units, and the people of Canmore need those units. And if we, as Councillor McCallum so eloquently put it, you got to see where the rub is. You got to allow for some rubbing. So that this may be that project. So thank you for all your hard work with development.
Councillor Hillstead.
I will also be happy to support this. I think it'll be a good project, and hopefully the increased amount of units will allow for some depressurizing of the cost on everyone in the market trying to get into rentals. So hopefully good things will come.
With that, then I will call the question on the motion. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. So thank you for the work. Planning's done, and the developer and the engineers and everything else, everybody else. Let's get her done. Just before we adjourn, there's one late breaking motion that we have to walk on. So do you have something for the overhead? Oh, you want a mic?
Thank you, Your Worship. I believe before Ms. Rogers addresses the item, we need council to amend the agenda. Yeah. So we would like, we've discovered that council needs to appoint a chair of the local ARB. And so you need to agree to amend the agenda to hear that agenda item by a 2/3 vote.
That'll be agenda item
G5.
G5?
ARB appointment of chair.
So I'll move the council amend the agenda to discuss item G5 as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Agenda is amended.
Thank you, Mayor and members of council. My apologies. We did determine, Ms. DeSoto determined that we missed a step in our update earlier. So in addition to appointing the additional Certified Assessment Review Board members to the 2018 Assessment Review Board, we do also need to appoint a chair as per subsection there 454-2. Council must designate one of the members appointed under subsection 1 as the chair of the Local Assessment Review Board and must prescribe the chair's term of office and the remuneration and expenses, if any, payable to the chair. So I do have a recommendation to put forward.
Good enough.
So our recommendation is that council appoint Councillor Sanford as chair of the Local Assessment Review Board until the next operational meeting of council for remuneration equivalent to the council per diem rate. And just as a reminder, that organizational review meeting is in October 23rd. There is an Assessment Review Board hearing in September, and we do need to appoint a chair for that meeting.
And you noted earlier in conversation that the chair can delegate that authority to...
Yes, that's correct. Under subsection 3, the chair may delegate to any other member appointed under subsection 1 any of the powers, duties, or functions of the chair.
So how would Councillor Sanford go about delegating? Does that require a motion, or just...
No, she would...
By proxy, or... So if Councillor Sanford's not able to make an ARB meeting...
Yeah, the municipal clerk is saying the minutes would note that the chair has delegated her authority to somebody else.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right then. Councillor Sanford, did you have any questions you wanted to ask? Councillor Sanford?
Well, just to note that this is required because of the changes to the MGA. Previously, with Assessment Review Board, we would just delegate a chair at the meeting, but now it was pointed out earlier that this new stipulation has come in, so we have a Assessment Review Board on September 17th, and I've already been asked to be the chair of that meeting, so this just confirms that. So thank you.
Well, we haven't approved it yet, don't you think? Okay, are there any other questions at this time? Seeing none, thanks very much. In that case, I will move that Council appoint Councillor Sanford as the Chair of the Local Assessment Review Board until the next organizational meeting of Council for remuneration equivalent to the Council per diem rate. Discussion on the motion. Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried unanimously. And I'll move the council be adjourned. Those in favor? Opposed? We're adjourned.